Benjamin, 180,000 chosen men. This is what we were just looking at. God intervened. We're going to paraphrase a little bit, and told them this was God's will. Don't fight your brothers. We're in verse 5 now. Rehoboam dwelt in Jerusalem, and here goes some details. We won't read all of this, but he fortified and built some cities in Judah, right? Bethlehem, obviously, as Bible students, we should know that. And then these other cities that we may not be as familiar with. Regardless, these cities he built up, right? Verse 11, he fortified the strongholds. He put captains in them, stores of food, oil, and wine. Sounds like good things. Verse 12, in every city he put shields and spears. He made them very strong, having Judah and Benjamin on his side. Okay, verse 13, and from all their territories, the priests, and here we go back to 1 Kings 12 and 2 Chronicles 10. The priests and the Levites who were in all Israel took their stand with him being Rehoboam with Judah and Benjamin. For the Levites left their common lands and their possessions and came to Judah and Jerusalem. For Jeroboam and his sons had rejected from them serving as priests to the Lord. All right, let's stop for a second. 1 Kings chapter 12, 2 Chronicles chapter 10 explains to us that Jeroboam, when he became king, right, he thought to himself, if we don't establish a new place to worship, every time the people from Israel would go back to Jerusalem to worship, they're going to be persuaded to rejoin Judah and Benjamin and follow Rehoboam and not meet Jeroboam. So instead, by counsel, right, some advice, we talked about this the last 3 or 4 Sundays about not receiving bad advice. By advice, he built some golden calves, and the golden calves were in 2 places, right? And he told the people of Israel, now keep in mind it's divided now, the people of Israel, there's no need to go all the way to Jerusalem to worship. Because now look, we got on both sides of where our kingdom is, we got a nice place to worship, right? This is your God now, he said, right? You go to this end or you go to that end. Then he started making priests out of anybody. That's why we get to this verse in 2 Chronicles chapter 11, where it says in verses 12 and 13 and 14 that the Levites now who were with Israel, see, because remember when we say with this one or with that one, Brother David's class, I think 3 weeks ago, he dove into this to remind us that the land was parsed out. That's why it was a big deal about the last 3 weeks when we were looking at Neighbor's vineyard, why he didn't sell. It wasn't just about money, right? The land was divided out by God. Remember, that was a long time ago for us as Bible students in this class. So in that parsed out, it's no different than in today's time, right? This is just a watered down modern day example, right? Some developer will come in and say, hey, listen, we're going to build condos, a subdivision, a strip mall, right? But we need this part of land. This part of land, we're going to give you $1 million for this land, right? And there's just a little house is on there. But the problem is that little house represents something from 150 years ago. Someone's going to be like, my great-great-grandfather was a slave and he had this land. But the people are saying, but this is $1 million. But you're not even doing anything with this land. We're going to be able to transform this land into some big economic development. And sometimes the people won't sell, right? That is a modern example. God parsed this land out based off of families, right? And in that, Naboth didn't want to sell for that very reason. But on the flip side, in today's class, we're looking at the flip. The Levites did something spiritual over a physical blessing, right? And this is very difficult to digest. They gave up their land because spiritually what the Israelites were doing was wrong. Now, keep in mind, now we go all the way back to Exodus, that the priests were supposed to come from the tribe of Levi. That's what God decided, right? Once Jeroboam starts saying, we already created a new way to worship, and now we're going to create new facilitators to worship, which will be priests, but the priests are going to come from everywhere. The Levites said, oh, we out. We picked up and we went over to Judah and Benjamin's side. And that king is Rehoboam, right? So that's what we want to highlight. We'll get into kind of why in a second. All right, let's go back to this text, 2 Chronicles 11, verse 15. Then he appointed for himself priests for the high places, for the demons and the calf idols which he had made. This is what we're just referencing. After the Levites left, those from all the tribes of Israel, such as set their heart to seek the Lord God of Israel, came to Jerusalem and sacrificed to the Lord God of their fathers. So they strengthened the kingdom of Judah and made Rehoboam, the son of Solomon, strong for 3 years, because they walked in the way of David and Solomon for 3 years. Now we get to some of the people, because that's why I said this is what get lost. Now some of the people are like, yeah, this is not a good worship, right? We're going to worship the right way. The priest left, the golden calf showed up again, I'm out, right? So now people are leaving, right? So this is something to look at, spiritually moving, like literally picking up your family for the sake of a spiritual context, right? This is lost on people today. Most people buy their home or job or rent and then look for a place to worship, right? Spiritually, that's backwards. You walk by faith, not by sight. See, most people already decide to marry someone and then come to church and say, pray for them. Most people pregnant, as they walking in here talking about, oh, pray for the baby. You already with child. What we prayed for? I mean, a delivery, I guess, but you already decided to do what you want to do. See, that's not the same when it says wait on the Lord. You're supposed to put in the request before you take action. See the difference? These people said, wait, we can't stay here. But here is not just some place that they found on Zillow, right? Here is where their family was living and given by God, but they had to make a spiritual decision, right? The decision was to stay where they belong, right? Literally, that's their land, or to go where those that were their kinmen were worshiping correctly. Which one do you do? See, and when I say leave, I'm talking about leave, right? Whatever you're doing, friends, family members, Levites, occupation, we got to go. And to go from A to go all the way to Z in 3 years goes by, we can't just read that and be like, oh, okay, good for them, right? Most of us, it'd be hard for us to move across the street for some spiritual reason, right? So just keep in mind the sacrifice that these people were making for the greater good. All right, verse 18, Rehoboam took for himself as a wife. We won't get into that too much. She bore children. We're now in verses 19, 20, and 21. Rehoboam loved his wife, loved Maacah, the granddaughter of Absalom, more than all his other wives and his concubines, for he had 18 wives, 60 concubines, and he had 28 sons and 60 daughters. Now, Rehoboam's father is Solomon. Now, there's some improvement if you want to say it that way, right? Because Solomon had like 1,000, right? So we do see some reduction here. But the problem is the number is more than one. So you get my point? So with that, it just became problematic. As Bible students, you should remember the granddaughter's name, Maacah, or you should remember her grandfather, Absalom. We'll get into that in a second. Anyway, verse 22, Rehoboam appointed Abijah, the son of Maacah's chief, to be leader among his brothers, for he intended to make him king, and do it wisely, and disperse some of his sons throughout all the territories of Judah and Benjamin to every fortified city, and gave them provisions, abundance. He also saw many wives for them. All right, that's Rehoboam. Okay, now let's go to our sheets or your book, lesson 7. We're just going to look at, see how many questions we get through for Rehoboam. I doubt we'll spend much more than today's class on Rehoboam, because there's not much, but we'll see where the discussion goes. All right, who was Rehoboam? We already had said this is Solomon's son, right? Rehoboam is now the king over Judah and Benjamin because of this divide. Now, where did this divide come from? Let's remind ourselves what we read at the beginning of class, right? He had counsel from 2 places, right? The older people and the people he grew up with who were younger. Age is not the point, though. The point is experience. What older people have over younger people is experience. This is what younger people discount. Let's talk about in the workplace. You can be a higher than 4.0 student in any discipline in school. it will never, ever supersede experience. Somebody could have no degree, but be able to do brain surgery because they may have done 500 successful surgeries already. You at school learned a new way, but you have never tried. See, you're working on cadavers. And the difference between a cadaver and a real person is if you make a mistake on a cadaver, nothing deadly will happen because they already passed away. See? But the surgeon who's working in real time knows that if I make the wrong move, it will end this patient's life. See? So that is where we put the weight is on experience. So when you get advice, remember last 2 weeks we were talking about this, internet, family, friends, even yourself. Bible says lean not on your own understanding. When you receive that advice, you need to weigh that against something. See, if you only internalize it, you always going to come up with your own solution because things should make sense to yourself. See what I'm saying? But if you're saying, should I do A or B? And you hear advice for why to do A and advice for why to do B, you don't just pick the one that you agree with. You have to weigh it against something. See, somebody who has experience in something is weighing it against a track record. 500 surgeries is a lot. So they're going to go into their mind, he or she, and think back, well, here's all the surgeries, some that I did right, some that I did wrong. And sometimes I did wrong, but it just was the grace of God. They may feel love that the outcome wasn't deadly. So they're going to be like, I'm not going to lean on that, right? I'm going to lean on the sure bet way. That's what experience gives you. When you don't have experience and you just have book knowledge, you're just going off of the information that you read and that you memorized, right? That's coming from somebody else, see? So you're going to say, I'm going to refer to this. Remember, I told you the person with the experience has two things. They're going to know about the times it went right and the times it went wrong. See the difference? Young people don't have enough track runway of experience of things going right and wrong because you barely lived any days. See, older people say, I have a lot of days or months or years or decades where it went wrong. See, so I have enough experience to say that's the wrong path. Young people are usually optimistic, see, because they're just looking at it from a textbook. A textbook is optimistic. See what I'm saying? So therefore, they're looking at the world, which is a benefit, right? There's a lot of innovation that comes from that, but we're talking about experience. You look at what the world could be when you don't have enough experience, right? You're looking at what the surgeries could be. But the surgeon is working off of pure, cold, hard facts because they work every day, see? And they know what it's like to lose a patient. See what I'm saying? So a real champion in sports have lost before, right? When you never lost, it's kind of hard to really appreciate the wins, right? Because you never had to watch the other team celebrate. Right? That changed you to say, oh, that's never going to be me again. So in the doctor example, you never had to go to a patient's family and tell them that they passed away due to the surgery. My point is, in these examples that we see this advice coming from Jeroboam and Rehoboam's camp, Rehoboam listened to the younger people and they said, tax the people more. So he did that. Right? Then he started establishing things and sent this guy out. You know what the people did? Stone that guy to death. Because the people realized what? It's more people than Rehoboam's people. So they had to flee. Then Jeroboam replaced because the people said, go get Jeroboam. We're going to make him king. Keep in mind, nobody asked God about this. And now Jeroboam said to himself from counsel that he had, let's make some new gods because if these people go worship back in Jerusalem, they'll be persuaded back to join Rehoboam and Judah and Benjamin, and everything will be back to where it was and we'll lose power. Those two men, if we look at it outside looking in, were leaning on the advice, the counsel from within and from people that they trusted. They never consulted God. Already, that's the number one issue. And they were not leaning on experience. Let's look at Jeroboam quickly because we did him some months ago. All someone had to do was, wait a minute. I remember when we had one golden calf, and how bad was that? This guy made two of them. See what I'm saying? Someone will say, oh, I forgot all about golden calf. Yeah, this is probably not a good idea. Look at Rehoboam. Any time from David to Rehoboam, someone could have looked and said, let's just go back to the law. Before we ask what we should do about it politically, let's just go about the law and see. The law is filled with how to treat your neighbor. All someone had to do was say, oh, just based off of experience alone, this is not a good idea, because there were aspects of Solomon's kingdom. We looked at this during a pandemic where he was grabbing these people to labor and build, but the people were resenting this, right? Because they're basically just low entry level workers, right? High work, low wages. But no one looked at anything from God's point of view or counsel or from experience. They just leaned on their own understanding. What we talked about the last several weeks was to make sure that we as individuals don't do that in our own life. And when I say that, I'm talking about every aspect of your life. Who you date and marry, how many kids to have, where you live, where you work. Let's talk about work. People will be like, oh, okay, today my boss yelled at me, I'm gonna quit. Hold up. First of all, were you at fault? Yeah, well, you should have got yelled at. People that have a mountain of responsibility, men do this and come home and say, I quit. Why? Well, because I don't like them anymore. Well, sweetheart, I don't think people like picking cotton either, but what you gonna do? There's no such thing as doing what you like when you have responsibility. That's a news flash, because I know in this society, people don't believe that. But I don't think people like working at factories in the turn of the century in the 1900s, did they? Remember, people used to stand outside waiting for a day. Did anyone like that? But you had responsibility. See, young people today feel like I should be able to do what I love. I don't know what job that is. What job is it? What you love? The problem are bills. See what I'm saying? You have rent or mortgage. You have car note or public transportation. You have food. You have bills. Therefore, bills are not going to wait while you find yourself, correct? So therefore, some adults will know there's periods in their life where you have to do what you have to do in order to later do what you want to do. Young people don't operate like that, correct? Young people will drop out of school because they didn't like the class. What does that mean? You got to stop thinking that you always can get to do what you like. Now, older people realize that, right? Because they have experiences, days. So therefore, there's sometimes you got to lean on responsibility to say, you know what? I may not like this job, but I have a responsibility to my family. I'm going to do what I have to do. I'm going to pray that God moves me to a different situation, right? A lot of conflict could be resolved that way. So that's one thing in terms of work. But every aspect of your life, you got to make sure you come to God first. Now, we started with talking about some examples. Don't already have accepted the job and then put in a prayer request, because you're asking us to pray about what? You already going to work there. What you want me to pray? You need to pray when you thinking about quitting for guidance, right? And again, I can't stress this enough for men. Men need to work. Don't quit and then later be like, oh, God will provide. Do not work that way, right? You got to focus yourself in terms of order and order, right? Don't already be married and put a prayer request in. You know, we pray for a good marriage. Yeah, we do too. But it would have been nice to pray for a good mate for you first. Go to God first. We done spent the last several months reading person after person after person who never went to God first, and all the bad that came of it. It would be completely foolish for us in this class to every Sunday leave and make the same mistakes in our life that we read about every Sunday, this whole pandemic. It literally would be foolish. We can't bear. Last week was one of the first weeks we remembered in months that God was even mentioned in the Bible study. Isn't that strange? Because we kept reading about people just doing whatever they wanted to do. Finally, last 2 weeks, someone said, hey, let's ask God. Oh, God finally showed up in the group chat. Hey, yeah, you're right. I forgot about him. So we got to make sure that when we read these things as a survey, we don't go home and be like, well, that was a good story, but I got to do what I got to do. Small or large, Bible say, pray without ceasing. Go to God and seek his counsel. so that we don't make the same mistakes. Now, we're not kings and queens over people, but if these people made big mistakes in these examples, the ramifications of our poor mistakes could be just as dire in our lives as their lives, right? 2 weeks ago, we talked about family legacy. We talked about spiritual legacy, right? There's some decisions that you can make that could be great for your family financially and poor for your family from a spiritual standpoint. That's why it's always difficult for church families to make financial decisions, because you're weighing two things that the world only weighing one thing. You weighing the finances and the spiritual. See, that's two things. The world just thinks finances. Which one more? I'm going over there. Spiritually, you're thinking what's best for my family, short term and long term. See what I'm saying? That is more difficult. So if we know already we have more difficultness going into decision making, we got to make sure as Christians we don't lean on our own understanding. That's what Rehoboam did wrong. That's what Jeroboam did wrong. We got to look at these two examples and say we're not going to do that. If each family left here today and said, excuse me, I'm going to make a commitment to not make small or large haste decision without seeking God's counsel, every person's address will increase in a short period of time. The problem is people hear this advice every single week, but when they go home, they feel like they can parent and have a marriage and run their household as they see fit and not towards a standard. The world lived like that. The world lives standard free. But Christians are supposed to live to a standard. They're supposed to take what they feel and see if it mirrors this. If it's misaligned in any way, you, not my will, but your will be done. See? But the problem is we do our will and pray God's will align with our will. See, that's backwards. First, got to pray for God's will be done, right? So I got to pray that my will bends to God's will, not God's will bend to my will. That may seem small, but it's huge. That frame of mind, if we can change that, you would have a lot more peace in the short term and the long term. And I'm telling you, this is life decision peace, right? I'm talking about decisions that you got to make as an individual, as a family, as a congregation. Go to God first and wait. The signs will be there. But if we're so blinded by what we want to do, we'll never see the sign, right? And a quick example before we take comments was, remember, they were looking for God, this loud thing and that loud thing, but God was only in what? The quiet whisper, see? Because if you so looking for this loud thing, you're going to miss God was talking the whole time, right? That's a good example, because sometimes the loud is the distraction, and that's what happened with Jeroboam. In the reading, it said God allowed him to be swayed away. Rehoboam, God allowed him to be swayed away by the younger council. See, because God said, this is my will, and no one consulted me, so I'm going to let them do what they're going to do, even though I know this is going to divide the nation. See, nobody stopped to say, hey, God never wanted this. God made a prophecy that it looks like if we go down this path, this prophecy will come true. No one consulted God about it. That's the key verse in these two chapters of 1 Kings 12 and 2 Chronicles 10 that gets missed, is when it says that Rehoboam got the bad counsel, God allowed it. Remember, God looking down, right? He knows the pathway and he knows what you're going to pick. All someone had to do is say, God, should we do it? Nope. And then when they go to fight, remember, he gets 180,000 people. God said, what? Don't fight your brother, because this was my will all the time. Remember, I had the prophecy. Oh, we forgot. Yeah, see, so now divided. And the Bible said to this day of that writing, they were at war because nobody listened to God's counsel. See what I'm saying? So now you look down and say, look at all of the turmoil that came from this reading, all because people didn't conform to God's will and they did their will. You could make one decision in your life that seems like the best idea ever. And if you live long enough, can look back at your life and be like, that was my family's turning point. That was where we messed up. Literally that day, that time. And from that bad decision, Everything went downhill from that. Or you can look at a positive. You can be like, I remember when I made this certain decision and everything for my family went up from me. Everything was an upswing from that day. So it's that important. This is what, if we can get younger people to believe in, we wouldn't repeat human historical cycles of how important decision making is. Young people just haphazardly make decisions, right? They don't think long term. If we can think about the long term ramifications of our decision, God only knows how successful that we could be. All right, Brother David, go ahead.
One of the things that I found that was very interesting was every time these decisions are being made, every time these big changes are being made, there's always somebody who's there to give the kings or the rulers counsel. So it wasn't like they were going in blindsided, right? Like even we following Jeroboam, we see even Jeroboam time. There are people that are giving him wise advice. We see it just last week, like in Ahab time, right? Like Ahab, there was a guy that was giving him like he was literally ignoring that one guy because he didn't like what he had to say. And these are kings, as in like we read through the scripture before, they are held in higher standard. As in from a normal Israelite, they have a higher knowledge of what it is to be connected with God versus the common man being God. Like we follow Moses, but that's your lead example. The way Moses got out was not because of his will, but because of God's guidance. And following from David to Solomon, literally all the time, this should be an example for kings. I'm saying this because in life, when you yourself are not looking to the scripture, there might be somebody who might be actually giving you a guidance who is looking at scripture, but you're actively ignoring even that. As in, you're like this perfect example for where everyone was. There were people literally last chapter, right? First Kings chapter 11, that was the chapter right before we read today, where it said that one of the prophets mentioned that if you do whatever I command you, walk in obedience, that God says that that He will be with you. You will build dynasty during the life of David. He said that I will humble David's descendants because of this, because he turned his hard way, right? As in, there's a pre-warning that is coming up, and that is not lost. Like that is given to the way of going, that is given to the individual to use that wisdom, to use that pre-foreseen. I think sometimes when you are kind of hard-minded, like you're set on your own mind, doesn't even have to be God. It could be literally somebody who's giving you wise advice that you're just ignoring. Right? It's somebody who is coming. Like you're looking for a sign. That person might be the sign that is giving you the right guidance, because you're so self-inflicted on your mind, right? And part of it has to do with trying to like you're better than everybody. Like in this regard, like the young people might know because I will be better than my dad. My dad, whipped you with a whip, I whip you with a whip. Like it's like I don't want to the last person who did it, not realizing why was the reason that this.
Yeah, I mean that's again, I can't stress enough how important it is to take the last couple of weeks home. Remember, I think it was either right during the pandemic, we were looking at David and Solomon's family. Remember, we spent months in that. We were like, hey, parallel this even with Fantastic Family, right? Take their family and use it as family Bible studies, right? This is the same. It may not seem the same, but it is. Take these chapters and make sure you're not just reading them as like History Channel. And look at the positives and the negatives, right? The successes and the mistakes, and apply it to a family discussion, right? Bible study in your family is okay to have a discussion, right? It's not just about, shouldn't be mini preaching, right? Like somebody shouldn't just be preaching to the house, right? You got to hear and then go home and discuss, hey, are we doing this? Yes or no? What are ways we can improve? That's what a team does. If you watch American football, on Monday, you're supposed to break down what you did right and wrong on Sunday. We want to just do the right, but you got to watch film and see where you missed some of the routes so that next Sunday you don't make the same mistakes. Missing that breakdown on Monday is just as critical as missing the game. Now, someone say, why? Because if you miss the review on Monday, you could very well make the same mistakes that you won last Sunday against a new team this Sunday and lose. That's what happens in life. Remember, I talked about the surgeon. The surgeon waits sometimes and say, I made a mistake, but the patient didn't die. They don't say, I'm going to go make the mistake again because the patient didn't die, because each patient is different. That's how a successful sports team in a season gets better. Some people win, and if you look halfway through the season, you'd be like, oh, they were not even top 5 team in the league. But they made a change, see? And they just got better and better and better, and they end up winning. When we look back, we see, oh, that team never gave up. Some people halfway through the season was number 1, but they lost because they were doing better and better, and then they stayed, and then they dropped down. That's how families are. Some families, like Parable of the Sowers, start off strong, and then something happens, and then they drop. Some families start off dropping. Something happens and a change. That's why I'm telling you, it's best to go on a regular basis to meet with your family. It don't matter if your kids are older, if they're younger. It's never too young and it's never too old to sit down and say, hey, let's have a real discussion, right? Let's not talk about games or fun or trips or politics. Let's just talk about the things that are going to be here even when we're not here. Just 1 hour discussion and see how family members view certain things. Hey, and why do we view it that way? Is there any reason, right? Is there any systematic reason why, right? Is there something that the generation before us did that would lead us to act the way we're acting now? See, if we were doing that as families, each family would be doing better, because every week the teams that do that will be able to see the flaws in their game the day before and make sure they practice all week to not repeat that flaw. But how many of us could be honest and say in the last 365 days, you even did that once with your family? Just one time. How many people one time had a Bible study like that with their family? Just once. No sports team on God's earth will ever win without reflecting. No one would ever win. Do you hear what I'm saying? There will be no winner without Monday. But we only looking at championship. But see, champions are made in practice. See, the only reason why they're champions is because they practice. How can I just show up to a game and perform? But when we talk about spiritual things and family things, we just show up to perform without any practice. Where's the practice? Well, we just practice on the go. You can't be successful that way. You can get by that way, but you can't be successful, right? Today's class, we're talking about success. So in this chapter, we did mention some of the successes that Rehoboam had, right? He did have some mistakes and failures. 1 Kings chapter 12, 6 through 15 and verse 18 looks at some of the mistakes that King Josiah in the future is going to have to clean up, right? There's things that we talked about, ramifications that later on will come into play. The temple is damaged and not rebuilt properly. There's finances that weren't given properly or taken incorrectly from Syria. These things are ramifications that's going to become an issue later on down the road that another king is going to have to clean up. That's why I'm telling you, the better way is to think on a regular basis. Try to do it at least quarterly if you could. Monthly would be even better. To take some time to sit down with yourself or your family to do an inventory. What are some things that we're doing right? Start there. Always start with the positive. But what are some areas of improvement? Businesses do this. After you launch your project, they have a retrospect. We need to reflect on how the project went. What are areas that we did great? What are areas that we need to improve? If you were able to do that every month, right? Tomorrow is August. If you were able to look at your July and see the areas that you did great and the areas of improvement, you would have a better August. But instead, we have an August remix, which is just like July because we never analyzed July. You see what I'm saying? In your kitchen is that way. If you don't do an inventory of your refrigerator, what will happen after a while? Animals will start to come out of the refrigerator. See, at some point, you're going to have to open the refrigerator and do an inventory and see what can stay and what got to be thrown away. Correct? I wish you would set it or forget it with groceries. You just buy once and close it and it's just in there. It doesn't work that way. So in so many aspects of our life, we see the value of progress and inventory and reflection. But do we see the value in that from an emotional and a spiritual standpoint? All right, any more hands? Brother, did you have your hand or no? Okay, anyone else, any comments on what we're talking about before we move on? Okay, next week, like I said, we may do a brief recap, but Rehoboam, there's not too much here. So I'll let Brother David decide if he wants to circle back. We answered most of these. The only questions I say we could dive in deeper was question number 2. Question number 8, if you look at 2 Chronicles 12:15, Jeroboam and Rehoboam, it says they were just at war, right? But the other questions we answer. So Brother David, I'll leave it up to you if you want to do question number 2 in detail, but if not, we can move on to the kings of Judah. But regardless, if you have some time, I would suggest you to read 1 Kings chapter 12, 2 Chronicles chapter 10. We looked at those together. 2 Chronicles 11, we looked at that together. And then if you read half of 2 Chronicles chapter 12, that'll get you prepared as we go into the Kings, because the Kings is what really matters, right? Because that's what we're going to start seeing. But this chapter shows us the divide, because now we're going to shift our mind from the last couple of months looking at Israel. Now we're going to look at Judah. Remember, Judah is the house of David. That's the lineage that Jesus is going to come through. So that's the key one, right? So even though it's smaller, we got to look at it to see how it's maintained for God's overall divine purpose. All right, anyone else before we close? Yes, go ahead, brother.
Yeah, I was going to mention, I think chapter 2 Chronicles 12, verse 1 kind of wraps up this and tells you exactly Rehoboam's character. It says after Rehoboam's position as king was established and he had become strong, he and all Israel with him abandoned the law of the Lord. Right, so that wraps up and summarizes what he was doing. But what I take courage in, and this reminds me of Elijah, when after everything Elijah was going through, he cried out to the Lord, like, hey, am I the only one left? Like, what is going on here? We see here this example, like even if one person, even if he is king, even if he has all the power in the world, like there are others who will always revolt against him and follow the Lord. Right? There are always those, even if they're not mentioned, there are those who will continue to be faithful and continue to follow God, because back on in chapter 11, verse 16, although it doesn't sound like it was a lot of them, but some of them, the tribe of Israel, they rejected everything that he was trying to do. That, no, we're not going to do this. We're going to follow God. So although God is letting all of these things happen, and the evil people will get their dues, and we can see nothing good in sight, and we're seeing is darkness. But we have to remind ourselves, we have to keep to remember that, hey, God is still at work regardless. Even if you can't see the light, God is still there. God is still working some way, somehow. And so all you have to do is take courage and continue to do what you're doing on your part. But there are others who will continue to revolt and follow God through.
Yeah, I mean, let's go back to the sports example, right? Like in modern times, right? I love basketball. One of the great examples is LeBron James with the Cleveland Cavaliers. Basketball is a 7-game series, best of 7, which means you need to win 4 games. Golden State was up 3-1, meaning Cleveland won 1 game. Golden State won 3 games. That means how many more games Golden State got to win to be champion? 1 game. What if Cleveland said, we lost? We lost already. We might as well give up. But they won the next game. So then it was 3-2. Then how many games Golden State got to win? 1 more. We lost. Nope, they won it. Now it's 3-3. Once it gets 3-3, what? Anybody can win, because now it's 0-0. And they won again. You know why? Because they kept running their offense to what Brother Ricardo was. See, we look around and see, oh, look, let's see. Oh, look at society. Oh, we lost. So I got to now act like everybody. Why? What does what everyone else doing have to do with running your offense? See? You got to keep running your offense, even if it looked like the whole world is against. That's why Lord's Supper is so important, because in Corinthians, Paul said, I'm talking to you as a congregation. When you partake of the Lord's Supper, you proclaim the Lord's death till he comes. How about you focus on that? Well, no one else doing Lord's Supper. How about you focus? So at least some people remembering Jesus' death. Oh, okay, I can do that. See, just worry about you. If each person in this world worry about them, this world be way better. But people be not worrying about their last name, too busy worrying about somebody else's last name. See what I'm saying? So Brother Ricardo was saying in sports, a coach would be like, I agree 100% what he said. It don't matter if it's the fourth quarter and we down by 100. Never give up. That's what he said. Sports will teach you that all the time. But sometime in the first quarter, we give up. Oh, look, no, we'd have no way to win. Let's give up. There's so many examples we can show you in the world and in the Bible of people who never gave up, and the odds were stacked against them physically. But God's will, when we look back, said it wasn't. Okay, thank you so much. Let's end there for the brothers. Let's have a quick word of prayer in room number 4. The baptized brothers, for the rest of us, will give you some time to collect yourself and to gather your thoughts, gather yourself together, go to the bathroom, relieve yourself, say hello to one another. And then about 11, we'll start our intro song, and then we'll have our worship service in spirit and in truth. If you're visiting with us or joining with us physically or remotely, you're our honored guest. If you're online, we're going to end this session here. We're going to switch over to our live stream for worship service, and we're going to start momentarily. All right, everyone be blessed, and we will speak in a few moments. Thank you so much for your attention this morning.